Imagine the crisp chill of a new day. That specific kind of morning where the world is just completely silent.
Oh, yeah, before the chaos starts.
Exactly. You are standing in your kitchen, and you have this grounding warmth of a ceramic mug pressed against your palms.
Mm,
You take a breath, and you can smell the subtle, earthy aroma of freshly brewed tea rising in the steam.
right.
And in this solitary, quiet moment, you make a decision. A really profound clarity just washes over you. You decide that the dawn of the cycle is here.
Today is the day.
Right. Today's the day you finally change your habits. Today's the day you launch that project you've been putting off for a passage of eras, or, the day you finally shift your mindset away from that lingering negativity. You just feel ready.
It is such a beautiful state of mind. There is this immense, intoxicating power in that moment of absolute resolve. You feel as though you have finally cracked the code of your own life.
Yes, you are practically vibrating with purpose. So you put the mug down. You take a confident step forward into your day, ready to execute this brand new vision of yourself. But then, and this always happens almost immediately, something shifts.
The pushback.
Exactly. You feel this profound, invisible friction. It feels like you have suddenly stepped off dry land and are trying to walk through waist-deep water. Or, worse, it feels like someone has draped a heavy, rain-soaked wool coat over your shoulders.
That is a perfect way to describe it.
Right. There is this unseen undertow pulling you backward, dragging you down into those familiar, comforting, yet entirely destructive patterns that you literally just swore you were leaving behind.
Yeah, the ones you promised yourself were gone forever.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So today, we are pulling from a massive constellation of behavioral psychology frameworks, mindfulness principles, and neuroplasticity research to really understand our own inner resistance.
It is such a crucial topic.
It really is. We are going to unearth the hidden architecture of personal reality, expose what we will call the old frequency, and discover how to permanently starve the invisible forces that anchor you to the distant past.
I love that framing because that physical sensation of resistance, it is entirely universal, and it is the absolute definition of a psychological and emotional paradox.
How so?
Well, because the friction you are describing, that heavy, wet wool coat, it doesn't appear when you are stagnant. It appears precisely when you attempt to move forward.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Right. To understand this, we have to begin with an objective truth, a fundamental law of inner physics. Let's call it the universal law of progression.
Okay, I like the sound of that.
And in the physical world, we understand that for every force, there is an equal and opposite reaction. If you push against a wall, the wall pushes back.
Basic physics.
Exactly. And this same mechanic applies to the realm of human consciousness and personal growth. For every monumental force of progression you exert, an equal and opposite force of regression is automatically triggered into motion.
Okay, let's unpack this right away, because this is the core confusion that haunts the overwhelming majority of humanity. Just the mere act of trying to improve creates a literal biological pushback.
Precisely. And the vast majority of humanity remains entirely unaware of this dynamic.
They just think it's them.
Yes, they feel the pushback, they assume it is a sign of failure or, a sign that they are not meant to succeed, and they yield to it. And by yielding, they blindly feed the very friction that halts their growth.
Wow.
But we need to understand what this friction actually is. In psychological and neurobiological terms, it functions as an energetic entity. We refer to it as the old frequency.
Okay, let me stop you there, because I want to be very careful with our terms here for the listener.
Yeah.
When you say energetic entity and old frequency, that sounds a bit cinematic.
I know it does.
Or worse, it sounds like pseudoscientific buzzwords used to sell expensive meditation retreat. Are we talking about a literal ghost haunting us? Or is there a grounded physiological mechanism here?
That is a crucial distinction, and I am really glad you challenged that terminology. No, we are absolutely not talking about magic or a literal ghost.
Okay, good.
We are talking about the profound, deeply entrenched wiring of your own nervous system. The old frequency is a metaphor for the established neural pathways in your brain, specifically the basal ganglia, which governs your habits, and the amygdala, which governs your fear and survival responses.
So it's hardware.
Exactly. When we call it a blind intelligence or an entity, we mean that these structures operate automatically entirely below your conscious awareness. They have been cultivated over the passage of eras by your own past traumas, your past disappointments, and your learned survival mechanisms.
So it's not malicious. It doesn't hate me. It's just my brain trying to be highly efficient with the old software it has installed.
That's it, exactly. The
I-
brain is an energy conservation machine. It loves the familiar because the familiar is neurologically cheap to process.
that makes sense.
Right. The unfamiliar, even if the unfamiliar is a much healthier, happier reality, requires massive amounts of metabolic energy to process. So this entity was born in a specific emotional climate of your past, and its only instinct is to survive in the climate it was born into.
It just wants to live.
Yes, and it views your new, positive habits as a literal threat to its established order.
I think I have an analogy for this. It's like a stray animal you've been feeding for your back porch.
Oh, I like this.
Let's say, for as long as you can remember, every night you leave a bowl of scraps out for this wild creature. It gets used to the routine. It relies on it.
Right?
Then one day you decide you want to clean up your property. You want to close the door, renovate the house, and stop leaving the food out. But the creature doesn't understand your desire for self-improvement.
No, of course not.
It just knows it's hungry. So it will come to the glass door, and it will scratch at the glass and howl and demand its daily meal. It's not evil.
Yeah.
It just expects what you have always given it.
What's absolutely fascinating here is how perfectly that captures the dynamic. The stray animal is your old frequency. It's those deeply myelinated neural pathways screaming for their usual routine.
Right.
The glass door is the threshold between your past and your desired future. And the scratching. That is the friction you feel. That is the heavy wool coat. It is your nervous system demanding a return to homeostasis.
Wow.
Now, we must ask, what exactly is in the bowl? What is the diet of this psychological phantom?
What does it eat? Well, from a biological standpoint, I imagine it eats our stress hormones, right?
Yes, it eats your emotional energy. That is heavily driven by the biochemical cocktail your body is used to producing. Emotion is energy in motion. It is the currency of consciousness.
Okay.
If this entity, this old neural network, was born from a vast constellation of anxious moments, then its primary food source is anxiety.
It wants to be anxious.
It is literally addicted to the cortisol and adrenaline that flood your system when you are stressed. It will actively seek to conjure anxiety within you today to sustain itself. If it was born from a deep-seated feeling of rejection, it will look for every opportunity to make you feel rejected, just to get that familiar chemical hit.
So when I wake up in my kitchen, drink my tea, and decide to change my life, I am essentially declaring a famine for this entity.
Yes.
I'm telling it, I'm no longer going to feed you anxiety. I'm going to feed myself peace. And the entity panics.
It panics completely, and it starts scratching at the glass. It floods your system with doubt, brain fog, and resistance.
Yeah, I've felt that brain fog so many times.
And if you don't recognize the scratching for what it is, a dying neural network fighting for its survival, you might mistake that anxiety for your own genuine intuition.
Oh, man. You might think, oh, I feel anxious about this new project. My gut must be telling me it's a bad idea.
Exactly. In reality, it's just the old frequency begging for a meal.
This brings up a critical point about the word frequency itself. In the modern self-improvement space, frequency has become this incredibly vague concept.
Very vague.
People say, you need to raise your frequency, or, I'm just vibing at a high frequency today. But if we are stripping away the mystical fluff, what does that actually mean in terms of our daily lived experience?
We must absolutely dismantle this commercialized concept of frequency. It is not something you buy, and it is not a mood you simply switch on by listening to a specific genre of music.
Right.
Frequency is, quite literally, your baseline level of awareness. It is the clarity of your cognitive and emotional lens.
Your level of awareness. Let's break that down so the listener can really grasp the mechanics of it.
Sure. Your consciousness exists on a spectrum of clarity. A low frequency is characterized by a low, reactive, heavily distorted level of awareness. You are operating purely on survival instincts, reacting to every trigger based on past traumas.
You're just reacting.
Yes. But a high frequency is characterized by a high, acute, objective level of awareness. You are observing reality exactly as it is without projecting the past onto it.
It's like looking through a window in the dead of winter. If you have a low frequency, you are looking through a heavily smudged, deeply fogged up window.
Yeah, you can barely see.
You look outside, and the shapes are blurred. A swaying tree branch looks like a monster trying to get in. A passing car looks like a menacing threat. Your interpretation of the outside world is completely distorted by the fog and grime on the glass.
That is perfectly said.
But a high frequency is simply taking a cloth and wiping the glass completely clean. Suddenly you see reality with this sharp, piercing clarity. The monster is just a tree. The threat is just a car. You dissolve the illusions of separation and danger simply by seeing clearly.
That is a brilliant way to conceptualize it. The fog on the glass is the illusion created by your amygdala constantly scanning for threats based on outdated information. Wiping it clean is elevating your awareness, utilizing your prefrontal cortex to assess reality objectively. Now, let's take this a step further and look at how this awareness dictates your external circumstances. Let's look at the cosmic cipher.
Okay, cosmic cipher. Again, I'm putting on my skeptic's hat for the listener here. This sounds dangerously close to the idea that if I just think happy thoughts, a sports car will magically appear in my driveway.
I know exactly what you mean.
We need to ground this. How does a cipher actually operate in the human brain?
I welcome the skepticism because the reality is far more grounded and, frankly, far more powerful than magical thinking. When we talk about the cosmic cipher, we are talking about how your brain filters reality.
Okay, the filter.
Imagine that reality contains an infinite storehouse of potential experiences and data points. At any given moment, you are surrounded by a vast constellation of opportunities, connections, and solutions, but your brain cannot process all of it.
It would explode.
Exactly. It uses a filtering mechanism, primarily the reticular activating system, or RAS, to decide what information gets through to your conscious mind.
So the cipher is the specific programming I give my brain's filter.
Exactly. To unlock a specific life condition, say abundance, deep connection, or career success, you must emit the exact energetic cipher, the exact cognitive emotional programming that matches the lock.
Right.
If your internal programming is set to scarcity and betrayal, your RAS will literally edit out the opportunities for abundance and connection that are sitting right in front of you. You won't even see them. The product code must match the item you're trying to pull from the warehouse.
So if I want to unlock the reality of deep, fulfilling relationships, I can't be walking around holding the cipher of distrust and betrayal.
The key won't turn.
My brain will only spot the people who are likely to betray me because that's the pattern it recognizes.
Yes, your brain will seek out the familiar misery to validate its own programming. But this brings us to a massive pitfall that traps a huge portion of well-intentioned people.
What's that?
Because they hear this, they understand they need a new key, a new frequency. But instead of doing the deep, arduous internal work to forge a new key and rewire their nervous system, they try to fake it. This is the danger of the spiritual mask.
Oh, the performative mask. I see this everywhere. It's what psychologists sometimes call toxic positivity or spiritual bypassing.
Yes.
People attempt to adopt a hot frequency by simply changing their vocabulary. They start speaking in this very slow, breathy, serene tone. They use words like alignment, resonance, and manifestation incessantly.
They curate the aesthetic.
Exactly. They curate an aesthetic of peace on their social media. They refuse to acknowledge anything negative.
And while there is nothing inherently wrong with those words, adopting them as a persona while ignoring your actual emotional state is no different than putting on a costume. The word persona actually derives from a classical term meaning mask.
I didn't know that.
They are swapping one behavioral box for another. But the universe and your own biology is not easily fooled. Reality does not respond to the mask you wear.
It sees right through it.
It does not listen to your performative vocabulary. It responds exclusively to the raw, unvarnished essence of your internal equilibrium.
You can say I'm at peace all day long, but if internally your nervous system is tightly coiled with anxiety, pumping cortisol, emitting a signal of fear, your brain filters reality through that fear. Reality delivers the experience that matches the fear, not the vocabulary.
Precisely. You cannot trick the storehouse. The cosmic cipher reads your actual internal state, your true level of awareness, not the performance you are putting on for others or for yourself.
Right.
This is why it requires genuine, profound internal transformation. You have to actually sit with the uncomfortable emotions, process them, and reprogram the system.
Yeah.
You cannot just slap a coat of white paint over a rotting wall and call it renovated.
Let's transition to the practical application of this. Let's say someone's doing the genuine work. They aren't faking it. They are sitting with their discomfort, they are wiping the fog off the window, and they are truly elevating their awareness. What happens then? Does the old frequency, this old neural network, just pack its bags and leave quietly?
If only it were that simple. No, this is where we enter the true anatomy of self-sabotage. Because the old frequency, facing starvation, executes its core survival tactic. It lies in wait.
It
It
hides.
observes you elevating, maintaining this new clarity, and it waits for a solitary spark of adversity. And when that tiny spark inevitably occurs because life is entirely composed of fluctuations, the old frequency works tirelessly to fan that spark into an all-consuming fire.
Its goal is to turn a minor slip-up into a catastrophic spiral.
That is the defining mechanism. It wants you to take a tiny moment of friction and use it to justify burning down the entire house you've been building. It wants you to say, see, I knew I couldn't change. I knew this was too hard.
It's like venom. Think about how a serpent hunts in the wild. When a serpent strikes, the physical puncture of the fangs is painful. Yes, it is a shock to the biological system.
Right.
But the tiny puncture wound itself is rarely fatal. It's just two small holes in the skin. What destroys the system is the venom that is injected during the strike, and crucially, how that venom is allowed to circulate through the bloodstream afterward.
The puncture versus the venom. This is a profound distinction for the listener to grasp.
Right. Let's make this incredibly concrete. Imagine you are driving to a job interview for a position that could completely change your career trajectory. You're feeling confident, you've done the work, you are maintaining a high level of awareness. Suddenly, you hit a plot hole and get a flat tire.
Oh, the worst timing.
The flat tire is the puncture. It is a neutral external event. It is a momentary, frustrating strike. But the internal emotional tailspin that follows, the narrative you spin in your head while sitting on the side of the road with your hands gripping the steering wheel,
That's the venom.
you start thinking, of course this happens to me. Nothing ever works out for me. I'm cursed. I shouldn't even bother going to the interview now. I'll probably just fail anyway. That internal narrative is the venom. And you are the one consciously choosing to circulate that venom through your own psychological system.
And that venom is precisely what the old frequency feeds on. It uses the external puncture, the flat tire, as a justified excuse to unleash the internal venom of unworthiness and defeat. It gorges on that negative emotion.
Wow.
And it does this most aggressively at a very specific time in your growth journey. This brings us to a massive revelation, what we might call the paradox of maximum effort.
If you are listening to this on your commute or, while you're washing the dishes, I need you to pause and really hear this. This concept completely changed how I view my own failures. The paradox of maximum effort. What does it mean?
It is the realization that the old frequency will fight the absolute hardest precisely when you are making the greatest magnitude of progress.
Why is that? Why do things seem to go completely sideways? Why does our anxiety spike to unbearable levels right when we are on the verge of a massive breakthrough?
Because your rapid evolution threatens its very existence. When you are stagnant, the old frequency is comfortable. It is being fed a steady diet of your familiar anxieties and limiting beliefs.
Right, it's getting its daily meal.
But when you are making massive strides, when you are maintaining a high level of awareness and actively refusing to circulate the venom, the old frequency begins to starve. And just like any living organism facing starvation, it enters a state of panic. It fights for its life.
It freaks out.
It triggers what behavioral psychologists sometimes call an extinction burst, a temporary massive increase in the frequency and intensity of the negative behavior just before it is finally eliminated.
So when chaos suddenly erupts in your life, just as you are about to launch the business, or just as you are finally feeling secure in a healthy relationship, or just as you are about to reach a milestone of physical health, that chaos, that sudden urge to self-sabotage, is not a sign from the universe that you are on the wrong path.
Emphatically, no. It is the absolute opposite. That chaos, that sudden intense friction, is the sound of your old reality starving to death.
I love that.
It is the phantom throwing a tantrum because it knows it has lost its grip on your consciousness. Understanding this completely reframes the experience of adversity. Instead of seeing the friction as a stop sign, you must learn to recognize it as a milestone marker. It means you are winning. The resistance is proof of your momentum.
That reframing alone changes everything. Okay, so we understand the physics of it. If the old frequency survives on our energy and it waits for a slip-up to inject the venom, we need to know its exact playbook. What are the specific mechanisms it uses? How exactly does it pull us backwards so quickly that it feels automatic?
It feels automatic because it operates through heavily reinforced neural and emotional pathways. To dismantle it, we cannot just rely on willpower. We need to deconstruct its structural foundations.
Okay.
There are 7 distinct pillars, or keys, that the old frequency uses as feeding troughs. These are the core attributes that make up the invisible architecture of your past reality. If we dismantle these pillars, the old structure collapses.
Let's break down these 7 pillars. And I want us to spend real time on each one so the listener can identify exactly how this shows up in their daily life. What is the foundational pillar?
The initial pillar is old beliefs. Now, when we say beliefs, we are not just talking about passive thoughts or opinions you hold about the world. Beliefs are the invisible boundaries of your experienced reality.
The perimeter fence.
They act as the perimeter fence of your life. When a slip-up occurs, when that flat tire happens, or an obstacle hits the old frequency, immediately summons your past beliefs to build a wall around you.
It summons the classics. Success is inherently scarce. People will always betray you eventually. You aren't smart enough to handle this level of responsibility. You have to suffer and burn yourself out to earn love or money.
Precisely. And the insidious nature of these old beliefs is that they masquerade as absolute, unshakable
It
truths.
feels so real.
When the obstacle hits, the old frequency whispers, "See? I told you so. I told you this is how the world works." It uses the current, momentary failure to validate the historical belief. It uses a single data point to confirm a deeply held cognitive bias.
It's like walking confidently forward in a dimly lit room, feeling like you have a clear path, and suddenly crashing headfirst into a cold, hard glass wall that you completely forgot was there.
Yes.
It knocks the wind out of you. You didn't even see the belief until you collided with it. And then, once you hit it, your nose is bleeding, you are disoriented, and you are trapped behind it again. How are these glass walls even built in the first place?
They are built through repetition and emotional intensity, often in our formative years. If you experience a failure as a child and it is met with harsh criticism, your brain wires those two things together. Attempting something new equals pain and rejection.
Right.
That wiring becomes a belief. The brain builds the glass wall to protect you from attempting new things, thereby protecting you from potential rejection. It is a misguided defense mechanism.
So the old frequency uses these beliefs to keep us small and safe. But it doesn't just rely on the structure of the belief. It also relies on how we interpret the things happening around us. Does that bring us to the subsequent pillar?
It does. While a belief is the structural boundary, the way we interpret events within that boundary is governed by the second pillar, which is old perceptions.
The perceptions.
Yeah.
How exactly is perception different from a belief?
A belief is the glass wall. Perception is the lens through which you look at the events occurring on the other side of the glass. And to understand perception, we must accept a concept that can be deeply challenging to the human ego. Reality possesses immense, profound value, but absolutely no inherent meaning.
Wait, reality has no inherent meaning. I can hear listeners throwing their hands up at that. That sounds almost nihilistic on the surface. If nothing means anything, why bother trying to improve?
It sounds nihilistic until you realize it is actually the ultimate form of psychological liberation. Reality simply is. Events occur, circumstances unfold. The meaning of those events is not baked into the events themselves. The meaning is entirely cast by your interpretive lens. It is your perception that assigns a narrative to the neutral data of reality.
Okay, I see. Let's use an example. Let's say I have a meeting scheduled with a mentor I deeply respect. And 10 minutes before we are supposed to talk, they cancel the meeting via a short text. The meeting is canceled. That is a neutral fact of reality. It just is. A schedule was changed.
Exactly. That is the objective data. But the old frequency steps in and begs you to look at that neutral event through the tinted, deeply scratched lenses of your past rejections and insecurities.
Right. Through the old lens, the canceled meeting isn't just a scheduling conflict. It becomes a deliberate personal sign of disrespect. It becomes concrete proof that I am unvalued, that my time doesn't matter, and that this mentor thinks I am a fraud.
Yes, the distortion.
The old perception demands that I distort the neutral reality to match the frequency of my historical pain.
And that distortion is entirely generated by you. It is like putting on sunglasses with red-tinted lenses. You look out at a beautiful, vibrant green forest, and because of the lenses, everything looks red, ominous, and dead.
You forget you have the glasses on.
You forget you are wearing the glasses, so you assume the world itself is actually bleeding. The old frequency sneaks up and slides those tinted lenses onto your face the very moment a slip-up happens, hoping you won't notice that you are the one coloring the situation.
And once I am wearing those tinted lenses, once I perceive the canceled meeting as a personal attack, my body is going to react to that attack, which cements the whole cycle.
Which seamlessly engages the third pillar, old reactions. This is where the trap snaps completely shut, locking you back into the old reality.
Old reactions. We're talking about the behavioral and emotional response to the distorted perception.
More specifically, the emotional response. We discussed earlier that emotion is the vital lifeblood of this entity. Emotion is the profound adhesive of the subconscious mind.
The glue.
It is the neurochemical glue that binds an experience to your identity. When you look through the tinted lens and perceive a threat, even a fabricated one, you react. But here is the critical part. You don't react to the present moment. You react with the turbulent historic anger or the deep-seated historical despair that you have carried for a passage of eras.
You bring a 20-year-old emotional reaction to a 5-minute scheduling problem today.
Precisely. You unleash a tidal wave of historic cortisol over a minor inconvenience. And when you react with that historic turbulent emotion to a present stimulus, you are actively gluing the old reality firmly back into your neural architecture.
Reinforcing the pathway.
You are reinforcing the myelin around those old pathways. You are literally telling your subconscious brain, yes, this old world of rejection and threat is still very real and we still live here. Keep the defenses up. This is how brilliant, capable people stay trapped in cycles of self-sabotage for their entire lives, reacting to today with the unhealed emotions of yesterday.
So how do we break that specific cycle? Because a reaction is so incredibly fast, it's almost instinctual. The puncture happens, the text message arrives, and the venom of rejection is flowing through my veins before I even consciously process what I'm reading. What is the practical antidote?
The antidote requires cultivating a gap between stimulus and response. The psychiatrist Viktor Frankl beautifully articulated that between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response.
I love that quote.
To widen that space, the moment you feel the trigger, the moment you feel that old familiar heat rising in your chest or that sudden nauseating drop in your stomach, you must initiate what we can call the pivot.
The pivot. Walk us through exactly how to execute that in the heat of the moment.
When triggered, you must force yourself to pause. Do not move, do not speak, do not send a retaliatory text message. Just feel the raw physical texture of the moment in your body. Notice your heart rate. Notice the tension in your jaw.
Okay, ground yourself.
Then, instead of defaulting to the historical reaction, you ask yourself a single, deeply disruptive question. How would the fully evolved future version of myself respond to this exact stimulus?
Oh, that is powerful. How would the fully evolved future version of myself respond to this? Because the future version of myself, the version who has already achieved the peace, the emotional regulation, or the success I'm aiming for, wouldn't throw a tantrum over a canceled meeting.
No, they wouldn't.
They wouldn't spiral into despair over a minor setback. They would probably just shrug, realize the other person is likely just busy, take a deep breath, and redirect their energy to something productive.
Exactly. By asking that question, you bypass the old frequency's neural pathway entirely. You are literally borrowing the energetic cipher of your future reality and applying it to the present moment.
Wow.
You force your prefrontal cortex to engage, which dampens the amygdala's panic response. You refuse to provide the emotional glue that the old reaction requires to solidify. You starve the phantom in real time.
I love that. You starve it by simply acting out of character from its perspective. You surprise your own nervous system with a completely different, elevated response. So if my reactions are cementing this old reality, how does my outlook on the future play into this? Is that where our next pillar comes in?
A perfect transition. Yes, what you anticipate happening next dictates the trajectory of your energy. This brings us to the fourth pillar, old expectations. And to understand the weight of this, we must recognize that expectation is the true engine of creation. What you deeply expect to happen serves as a magnetic blueprint for your reality.
But so often, human nature defaults to expecting the worst. We expect people to let us down. We expect the other shoe to drop. We expect that even if things are going incredibly well right now, disaster is waiting just around the corner, ready to wipe it all away. Why are we wired to be so cynical?
We do it as a deeply ingrained defense mechanism. From an evolutionary standpoint, expecting a predator kept our ancestors alive. In modern terms, we believe that if we expect the worst, we will cushion the emotional blow when failure arrives. We think we are protecting ourselves from the agonizing pain of disappointment. But the tragic irony of this mechanism is that the intense confidence you place in a negative outcome actually magnetizes that negative outcome toward you.
Wait, I want to highlight a phrase you just used. The intense confidence you place in a negative outcome. We don't usually associate pessimism with confidence.
But it is. Pessimism requires a massive amount of confidence in failure. You are absolutely certain things will go wrong, and that absolute certainty programs your reticular activating system to ensure it goes wrong.
Okay, give me an example.
If you expect a conversation with your partner to turn into a bitter argument, you will enter that conversation with your shoulders tense, your tone sharp, and your words defensive. You will inadvertently provoke the exact argument you were expecting. You become the conscious architect of your own demise simply by anticipating it as a foregone conclusion.
So expecting the worst doesn't protect you from pain, it virtually guarantees it.
Precisely. The old frequency uses a momentary slip-up to whisper, "See? Things are already going wrong." You should lower your expectations so you don't get your hopes up and get hurt.
And we listen.
And if you listen, you align your creative engine with the exact reality you are desperately trying to escape. To overcome this, you have to be willing to cross what I call the bridge of disappointments.
The bridge of disappointments. That sounds incredibly daunting.
It is daunting, which is why the overwhelming majority of people refuse to cross it. To reach your desired, elevated reality, you must abandon the comfortable, heavy armor of cynicism. You must risk expecting the best, even knowing full well that you might be disappointed.
That's terrifying.
You have to endure the raw vulnerability of open-hearted expectation, because the fear of expecting the best is the very barrier keeping you from experiencing it. You cannot arrive at a beautiful destination if you refuse to believe it exists.
You have to drop the shield. You have to look at the new project or the new relationship and say, I expect this to work out beautifully, and then sit with the terrifying vulnerability of that statement.
Yes.
And that leads right into the fifth pillar, because what you expect dictates what you look for in your environment, doesn't it?
A brilliant connection. Yes, expectation directs the eyes. And that brings us to the fifth pillar, old focus. The governing principle here is simple but absolute in its power. Where the gaze settles, energy cascades like an endless tide.
Where the gaze settles, energy cascades.
Mm.
If I am staring intently at the dirt, all of my creative and emotional energy is pouring into the dirt.
Exactly. Your attention is the steering wheel of your consciousness. Wherever you point it, your mind and body will follow. The old resonance, when fighting for its survival, will attempt to hijack your steering wheel.
It wants to steer.
It will hyperfixate your attention on the solitary spark of scarcity, conflict, or lack in your life. And it does this to deliberately blind you to the vast constellation of abundance, progress, and opportunity that is actively surrounding you.
It's the classic public speaking scenario. You give a presentation to an audience of a massive crowd. Almost everyone gives you a standing ovation. They are nodding, they are smiling, they are taking notes. But one person in the back row is looking at their phone and frowning.
Oh, yes.
Where does your focus go? The old frequency demands that you stare at that one frowning face for the rest of the week. You analyze it, you agonize over it, you pour all your mental energy into that single point of perceived failure while completely and utterly ignoring the sea of people who loved it.
That is the exact mechanism of the old focus. By forcing you to focus on the negative polarity, the old frequency siphons all of your creative energy toward that scarcity. It feeds itself perfectly on the anxiety generated by that one frowning face.
Wow.
To starve the old frequency, you must aggressively and consciously reclaim your focus. You must consciously choose to gaze upon the evidence of your progression, no matter how desperately the old frequency points at the one frowning face. You have to forcibly turn the steering wheel back toward the smiling faces.
Which brings us to the final two pillars of the old reality, the sixth and seventh keys. And it seems like if beliefs, perceptions, reactions, expectations, and focus all stack up together, they inevitably forge these last two.
They do. These form the final, hardest layer of resistance. The sixth pillar is emotionally charged thoughts. A thought on its own is fleeting. It is just a passing electrical impulse in the brain.
Like clouds passing.
But an emotionally charged thought is a thought that has been ignited by intense feeling. It carries a heavy payload of energy. It is the difference between thinking, I might not get this job, and feeling a crushing wave of despair while thinking, I am a failure who will never get this job.
The emotion acts as an anchor, weighing the thought down into the body.
Yes. And when an emotionally charged thought is repeated, reinforced, and solidified over time, it crystallizes into the final pillar, a conviction.
A conviction. Like a deep, unshakable knowing in your bones.
Yes. Convictions are the hardened bedrock of consciousness. They are the ultimate goal of the old frequency. When you hit an obstacle and you declare with absolute bitter certainty, I knew it was going to fail, or I knew they would leave me, that is a conviction speaking.
It's permanent.
You are taking old crystallized experiences, old wounds, and allowing them to dictate the absolute truth of a brand new, fundamentally unwritten moment. You are sealing your own fate with the gavel of past trauma. You leave no room for a different outcome.
I want to ground everything we've talked about, all 7 of these pillars, in a very tangible, universal, real-life scenario. I want you, the listener, to see how all of this operates simultaneously.
That's a great idea.
Imagine you are preparing for a pivotal, life-changing presentation at work, or maybe you are about to step onto a stage. This is the moment you have been working toward for a passage of eras. The opportunity is finally here. You are standing backstage, or you are in the hallway before you walk into the boardroom.
The anticipation?
Suddenly, the physical symptoms hit. You feel the cold sweat prickling on the back of your neck. Your breathing becomes shallow, your chest tightens, and this creeping, overwhelming certainty floods your mind. I am going to forget my words. I am going to ruin this. I always ruin things when it matters most.
That scenario is a classic, profound manifestation of the old frequency activating all of its defensive pillars at once. It is a full system alarm.
Right. And most people, including myself in the past, interpret that intense physical and mental sensation as a premonition.
Yeah.
We think, my body is telling me I'm going to fail. My gut is warning me this is a sign that I am not ready.
But it's not.
Based on the neurobiology and the behavioral patterns we have unpacked today, we have to reframe that entirely. That physical sensation, that creeping dread, is not a premonition of failure. It is simply the old frequency, recognizing that you are about to step onto a fundamentally higher plane of existence. It looks at the boardroom door you're about to open, realizes it cannot survive in that new room of success and visibility, and it is throwing a massive, desperate tantrum to pull you back to the safety of mediocrity.
That is exactly what is happening on a neurological level. The cold sweat, the shallow breath that is the phantom scratching furiously at the glass. It is using old beliefs, like I always ruin things, old expectations, like I will forget my words, and old convictions to flood your system with cortisol, hoping you will engage with old reactions and flee the situation.
It wants you to run away.
It wants you to walk away. But if you understand the mechanics we've discussed today, you don't flee. You observe the tantrum. You deny it the emotional reaction it craves. You widen the gap between stimulus and response. And you walk into the room anyway.
You walk into the room anyway, carrying the heavy coat if you have to, but refusing to let it dictate your steps. You let the old self scream, but you don't give it the steering wheel.
And this brings us to the master synthesis of our entire analysis today. Because what we are truly talking about here is the mechanics of profound, lasting transformation. And true transformation is not what the overwhelming majority of people think it is.
What do most people think it is? Because we spend massive amounts of money as a society trying to achieve it.
Most people believe transformation is a physical relocation or an accumulation of external accolades. They think if I just get the new job, or if I finally find the right relationship, or if I move to a new, exciting city, then I will be transformed. Then the heavy coat will fall off.
The geographic cure.
Exactly. But moving your physical body to a new location while carrying the internal architecture of the old frequency simply guarantees that you will recreate the exact same old reality in a brand new zip code. You'll find the same toxic boss, the same unfulfilling relationship dynamic, just with different faces. True transformation is entirely internal.
It has to happen on the inside before the outside actually matters. The frequency has to shift before the reality can change.
It is achieving an internal shift of such profound, fundamental magnitude that you become completely beautifully indifferent to the immediate external circumstances. You reach a state of equilibrium where a canceled meeting, a rejected proposal, or a sudden obstacle does not alter your baseline internal peace. You are no longer emotionally dependent on reality behaving exactly as you want it to. You maintain your clarity regardless of the weather outside the window.
You stop being a mirror. When you are operating in the old frequency, you are just a mirror reflecting the chaos of the world. If the world is chaotic, you feel chaotic. If the world is angry, you feel angry. If someone cuts you off in traffic, your whole day is ruined.
Yes.
But when you achieve this internal shift, you become the generator. You generate peace, you generate abundance, you generate focus. And eventually, reality has no choice but to organize itself around the magnetic field you are generating.
That is the ultimate mastery of the human experience. You cease to be a reactive victim of external fluctuations and become the conscious, deliberate architect of your own lived experience. And the struggle to reach that point, the constant daily battle with the old frequency, is not a flaw in the system.
I think this is a beautiful reflection on our broader human potential, because it is so incredibly easy to feel broken when you realize how much self-sabotage you engage in.
It really is.
You look at all this resistance, you look at the 7 pillars, and you think, why am I built this way? Why is it so hard to just be happy and progress? Why does my brain fight me? But those struggles, that heavy, wet wool coat, those aren't design flaws. They are the weights in the gymnasium of life.
The resistance is necessary.
They are the precise resistance required for us to lift, push against, and build the muscular strength of our own consciousness. You cannot build physical strength without gravity pulling against you, and you cannot build awareness without the friction of the old self pulling against your expansion.
The friction is the forge. The heat of that resistance is what burns away the illusions and tempers the steel of your new awareness. It is a necessary, beautiful, albeit painful, part of the process of becoming. Without the resistance, there is no evolution.
I think that perfectly sets up a final thought for us to leave lingering in the air today. Something for you, the listener, to mull over as you step back into your life, as you finish that commute, or as you put down the mug of tea and actually begin the work of your day. We have mapped out the architecture.
We have.
We know the phantom is waiting by the door. We know the biological mechanisms. We know the 7 pillars that will try to use against you.
The awareness is now present. The fog has been wiped from the glass. You can see the mechanism for what it is.
So the next time you take a step forward toward your highest self, and you immediately feel that heavy, familiar pull backward, the next time you feel the venom of an old belief trying to circulate through your mind because of a momentary slip-up, a flat tire, or a canceled meeting, instead of panicking, instead of fighting it, or spiraling into despair, or judging yourself for feeling it,
What is the alternative? How should they respond to that moment?
what if you simply smiled? What if you paused, felt the heavy coat on your shoulders, took a deep breath, and smiled in quiet recognition? What if you recognize that the intense friction you are feeling right in that very moment is simply the old you, the phantom, realizing it has finally lost its grip on your future? If you can smile at the resistance, if the past is finally truly starving to death right in front of you, what breathtaking new universe is quietly taking its first breath in the space you are clearing today?